everybody. It's 7 p.m. in New York and 4 p.m. in the Napa Valley. I'm Sam Kimball from New York Wine Events. Thank you for joining us on virtual day trip to wine country presented by Citi. We are here to discover 4 delicious Napa Valley wines, 2 whites, 2 reds, and it's going to be great. We're looking forward. Welcome to everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in. Please feel free to ask any questions using the Zoom chat along the way, and we will answer those, as many as we can, throughout the session on the fly. And also, if you would right now, hit the chat and let us know where in the world you are tuning in from. Each week, we are humbled to host people from all over the US and beyond. It's not only fun for us, but also we learn something from you guys as well when you put your comments and your questions into the live chat in Zoom, which we hugely enjoy, and it's a big part of the experience. I myself am based this evening in the East End of Long Island, all the way out 85 miles east of New York City, around the corner from the North Fork and the Long Island wine country. I see we have Arizona in the house, and Austin, Texas, and California coast, Hoboken, New Jersey, representing on the East Coast. It's great to see all you guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm really excited about tonight's session because we are virtually going to the legendary Silverado Trail in Napa Valley. Let's take a look exactly where we're headed, just in terms of the map. We are going to, in my background here, you see the state of California. That red shaded area is the Napa Valley, and right in the heart of that is the Silverado Trail. And here in my background, you can see an iconic Napa shot, and it's got the famous "Welcome to Napa Valley," world famous wine growing region. And we're really excited about that. So we're going to hallowed grounds in terms of wine and wine growing. And the Silverado Trail is a particularly interesting place because it's not only a scenic route that travels 29 miles from the eastern edge of the Napa Valley, parallel and several miles east up California Route 29. It's actually considered one of the most famous parts of the Napa Valley experience. Silverado is iconic in the world of Napa Valley wines. And fun fact, more than 400 wineries dot the fertile soils of the Napa Valley. It's one of the world's premier wine regions, as most of you or all of you know, and famed for its prized Cabernet Sauvignon. The trail was named Silverado, just a little point of trivia, because silver was discovered in Napa Valley in 1858 and wine production began in the 1870s. So we're a good 150 years into making wine there and making that Silverado Trail an important trade route. This evening, we'll be kind of laser focusing in on the Oakville wine area within the heart of Napa Valley. It's one of California's most renowned areas for producing wine. And another fast fact, Napa is warmer, considerably so in the summer, than Sonoma County to the west and Santa Barbara County to the south. So the Napa wineries, as many of you know, really favor varietals such as Cabernet Sauvignon that do well in that really warm climate environment. Our destination, which we're really thrilled about, is Minor Family Wines, which has been operating since 1996 in Oakville, California. So right in the middle of that iconic area of Oakville. Minor, who we hosted last year on this broadcast, has not only a great vineyard sites, but a really thoughtful winemaking process, which allows them to deliver elegant, expressive wines like the 4 that we're profiling tonight. When there are a couple surprises in terms of, especially one with a particular type of grape that we're going to profile tonight. And Minor's wines are really emblematic of the Napa Valley high quality selections. So much so that they've been featured 6+ times at the White House for state dinners, which is a big deal. There are 14,000 wineries in the US. If your wines make it to the White House, that's a feather in the cap of the winery in a big way. To learn all about Minor Family Wines, you can visit minorwines.com. I'm going to put up in my background here, because I should add that we have an offer tonight, which is great. And that is that if you order 6 bottles or more from the website, minorwines.com, and you'll save 20% if you use the promo code NYWE21. So check it out. There's some great wines, and this is some great savings as well. So we're really looking forward to that. I want to bring in Dave Minor now, who is the founder and the owner of Minor Family Wines. Dave, welcome. It is great having you back on the show this evening.
Thank you very much, Sam. It's great to be with you.
Well, I have to tell you, we're excited about it. Where exactly does the broadcast find you this evening?
I'm sitting in my house up on Howell Mountain. So I'm in a little town called Angwin, which is not much of a town. It's a supermarket, a school, and a post office. That's it.
And that's in Napa Valley, yeah?
Yeah. So I'm on the east side of the valley as well, which is also where the winery is. And but I'm a little bit north of St. Helena and east up in the Vaca mountain range.
That's great. Yeah, St. Helena is just, for anybody who's watching, if you've not been out to Napa Valley, make sure when you do go to stop by St. Helena. It's absolutely charming, beautiful little town right in the heart of Napa Valley. So Dave, you started Minor Family Wines in 1996. For those watching who are unfamiliar with the winery and your brand, what's the calling card of Minor Family Wines?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say because we actually make a lot more varietals than most wineries do. We probably make 25 different wines, and but probably what we're most known for and what we started out making were both Chardonnay and Cabernet based wines. And the Oracle is our flagship wine, which is a Bordeaux style blend from up in the Eastern Mountains, just a little bit north of the winery. And that wine is a blend of Cabernet, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Malbec, and Petit Verdot. But we do several different Cabernets. We do straight Merlot. We do some straight Cab Franc. And we do 3 or 4 different Chardonnays as well. And those are the wines that kind of put us on the map. And those are the wines people normally associate, I think, with Napa Valley in general. But over time, we've branched out and started making a whole bunch of different Rhone style wines. We also make some Sauvignon Blanc. We make 4 different Pinots from the Santa Lucia Highlands region. We make a little Sangiovese. We used to make some Tempranillo, and we made some Portuguese varietals for a while. We made Zin for a while. So we've kind of played around with a lot of different things, just because we bump into people who have grapes that are friends of ours, and I know they're good farmers, and they're like, hey, do you want some grapes? And so over the years, we've kind of played around with a lot of different things.
That is so interesting to hear. It's also just classic wine country. You bump into somebody and they're like, hey, you want to buy some grapes?
Yeah. I mean, I could tell stories about almost every vineyard that we buy grapes from now that were such weird coincidences. A friend of a friend's brother, he was here, and then whatever. I mean, and we just stumbled into a lot of these things. And a lot of them were things that I didn't really set out to make initially, but, like, Viognier, for example, which is, kind of our first wine tonight, I think. A guy just showed up at the door with grapes from kind of the Fresno area who had sold grapes to Phelps. And Gary Brookman, who was my brand new winemaker at the time, had worked with this guy when he was at Phelps before he came to Minor. And so the guy showed up. He goes, hey, I have some Viognier, I don't have a home for it. Would you like some? And I've always loved Condrieu. I love the Rhone Valley, and I never thought, hey, Viognier would be great, but it was very inexpensive. And so we started making it, and it's become, one of my most popular wines actually over the years. So, but in 1996, 97, very few people knew what Viognier was, in Napa or in California. So it took a long time to kind of develop a reputation for that grape.
Yeah, I'm curious, and so for everybody watching, if you would hit the chat and let us know if you have had Viognier, which is a French white wine grape, and makes terrific wine. I actually love Viognier, so I'm curious of everybody watching, how many people are Viognier, people and have had it and like it. I know I didn't have it. It was probably the first time I had it, Dave, was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, which, having been in the wine industry for 15 plus years, that was relatively late in my wine tasting experience. But yeah, there's a lot of people here. Yeah, you got some fans. Dana says, love Dave's Viognier. I concur, Dana. Yeah, everybody, we have some real wine. We have the pressure's on. No pressure, Dave, but this is a good wine audience. Everybody knows there's stuff here. Great to see also some people from various parts, Las Vegas and Arizona as well. Yeah, look, the Viognier to me is a great white wine that really pairs nicely with food and brings that freshness. And I know you guys are all about freshness and authenticity, so I think it probably fits into your game plan pretty well.
The tricky part with Viognier in California, though, is, in Condrieu, it's a very cool, kind of hilly. Condrieu is very rocky in northern Rhone, and it can be pretty chilly there. So they get great natural acidity from the soil, and in Condrieu, they always barrel ferment Viognier. They always do malolactic fermentation to it. It's just kind of what they've always done because of the weather. In California, that can be a very dicey thing because the temperature is so much warmer. So Viognier can, when it gets very ripe, become very syrupy, very viscous. So for me, the trick for us is we don't do any barrel fermentation at all. There's no wood at all. There's no malolactic fermentation at all. And when I first started hanging out with some of the guys from Condrieu, like Yves Gangloff, François Villard, Pierre Gaillard, Yves Couleron, these guys, when I started telling them about this wine, were like, well, that's not Viognier. But when they tasted it, they said, well, that tastes more like Condrieu than most Condrieu. They said that's the essence of the grape. But a lot of people in California try to make Viognier the way they make it in France, but the climate really has to dictate how you approach things. And for me, a lot of Viogniers from California can get that really overwhelmingly syrupy, thick, viscous texture, which for me kind of doesn't hit the mark for what I think of when I think Viognier. So,
and is that because, given the warm climate in California, it needs to be picked relatively early, so the sugar doesn't build up in the grapes?
Yeah, I think if you let it hang too long in California, what you get is very high sugar, which means very high alcohol, and also very high pH. So, as the pH rises, all of that total acid starts to fall out, and what you get is kind of a flabbier. It's like Chardonnay too in California. If you let it hang too long, or if you have it in too warm an environment, it can get that kind of flabby, overly buttery, rich style, which some people like, but for me, that's not what we're shooting for. So
yeah, interesting.
With white wines, it's really important in California to maintain acid, to maintain freshness and balance. And even with Chardonnays that we barrel ferment, it's really important that we not use too much new oak that we have good acid going in, so that if we do some malolactic fermentation, it's not going to get overly flabby. We want to maintain the balance.
Yeah, and just for anybody who's a wine intermediate like me watching, acid is a good thing in the sense that as long as it's balanced by the structure and the flavor of the wine, acid makes wine refreshing tasting. It's what makes a wine really refreshing, especially these white wines, and a white grape like Viognier. So you guys are kind of famous for using old world winemaking techniques and modern technology to optimize your wines. What does that mean exactly? What does that process entail, combining old world winemaking techniques and modern tech?
Well, I mean, I suppose that means a lot of things to a lot of people, but for me, what that means is we try to be very authentic with the varieties that we make. So we're not trying to make Sauvignon Blanc taste like Chardonnay or Viognier taste like Chardonnay. The varietal, we need to be true to the varietal, and the wines are made more in the vineyard than they are in the lab. So it's more about farming correctly, having the right vineyard sites, the right microclimates for those specific varieties. And then once we've picked at the perfect optimum spot that we want them, we leave them alone. I mean, we try not to intervene too much. We don't do a lot of filtration. We don't do strange additives. We don't do any, coloring things or flavor or aroma things. Making wine is a lot like raising your kids. You give them a good environment to become who they're going to become, and they become great examples of that. So for me, that's, and it's more about quality than it is about quantity. And it's more about, authenticity of place. All of those things to me are more, old world techniques or old world mentality. And when we do wines, we don't blend strange things together. So if we're doing Bordeaux wines and we're blending Bordeaux varietals, we're not blending Syrah into our cab. We're not putting Syrah into Pinot to make it darker. That I want them to be authentic. There needs to be a historical reference point for these wines. I mean, if you don't really understand the historical reference point for that wine, it becomes very difficult to identify it when you taste it. If you take Zin and Merlot and Syrah and, Carignan and blend it all together, the wine might taste very good and very interesting, but I couldn't tell you what's in that wine. I mean, it has no historical reference point to go back to. It's like, it's a mishmash.
Yeah. What? You just gave me a funny idea. Wouldn't it be interesting, maybe even a bit fun, to get a few master sommeliers in a room and have them try to pick apart just blends, not single varietal wines? Tell us what's in this one. That would be really interesting, because it's so hard once it's a blend, like you say, like who knows what it is.
I've been doing this for 30 years probably, and I know my wines really well. There are some very talented people out there who can taste wines and tell you vintage, region, all these things, and to me that's quite remarkable. But it's also, for me, that's kind of more of a party trick. It's like, well, who really cares? What I really want to do is sit down with some people that I love or like, or that I'm getting to know, share some food, drink some wine, and really enjoy it.
Yeah.
When I'm having dinner, I'm not like, talking about the technical aspects of the wine on the table.
Right. Exactly.
Like, it's freaking good.
Well,
like it.
And by the way, you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, for us and for our friends and our audience, it's so much, especially as we do a lot of virtual tastings, it's so much about food and wine pairing and less about, what's the soil and how many bricks, how many, which is the technical term for how much sugar is in a wine, naturally occurring sugar.
Detailed technical aspects about
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
The point is,
exactly.
you like it, and I don't really have rules about pairing wines with food necessarily. I mean, there are certain things that I love, like if I'm eating duck, I really like older Pinot that's a little funky, but I'll try anything with it. I mean, I'll have white wine with a steak. I mean, I don't have any rules. The rule is do what you want. I mean, that's
couldn't agree more. So in a moment, we're going to head into the four wines and get into those specifically. But you touched on something that you hit a nerve for me, and that is, some wines out there in the world, and even from Napa Valley today are made in a lab. They're made in a factory. They're made with additives, with coloring, with flavor additives. And I think one of the things that I like to share with our friends and colleagues in our audience is that some of the most popular brands you see on the shelves of wine stores and groceries and things are wines that are literally made in a laboratory, and they're made in tremendous high volume, a million cases or more than a million cases. Talk about that a little bit, because you're a winemaker and you know this stuff inside and out. And how does Minor Family Wines, as a small focused producer which doesn't do any of that stuff, contrast with that process?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of choices you can make as a winemaker or as a grape grower, or as a sales and marketing person. There are a million choices that you can make in the wine industry, and business is business in a lot of ways, and some people have a different focus than other people. So for me, I want to make wines that are as pure as I can make them, that are wines that I love to drink. And if I'm not excited about something we make that has my label on it, if I'm not like super psyched to take it home off the bottling line and try it, then I don't want to make it. It just doesn't make any sense for me to make stuff that I wouldn't drink. So,
but do you put any colors in the wines? Do you put any flavor additives in the wines?
Do very minimal interaction with the wines. I mean, if there are chemical or bacterial issues in the wine, we fix them. We take care of them. We monitor them very closely. We do all the things that we should be doing to produce a stable product that once it's in the bottle is going to be healthy. And every once in a while you get a bottle that has cork taint or something like that, or
right.
Temperature gets to certain wines, they can be affected and get sort of a cooked character if they get too hot. I mean, there are environmental things you can't quite control, but our goal is to make a wine that's as clean and as pure, I guess you could call it, as we can make, and have it be stable in the bottle and be authentic. We don't add coloring, we don't add flavoring. We try to make the wines have a clarity once they're bottled, but some unfiltered wines sometimes have a little bit of haze. Sometimes you have wines that have a higher tartaric acid level once you bottle. And so like a white wine sometimes will throw those little crystals if that particular vintage has a real high tartaric acid level.
Right.
And we try to cold stabilize those wines before we bottle so that those things crystallize and fall out. And then we bottle them off of the top and then clean up all the crap on the bottom so that it doesn't go in your bottle. But we don't add anything to try to make the wine taste the same year in and year out. In fact, I don't have any interest in the wine tasting the same year in and year out. I want to taste the vintage differences. A warmer vintage is going to have different characteristics than a cooler vintage. And I want to remember like that 1993 was a cooler vintage and had, great acidity even in the red wines. So they were a little bit edgy as young wines. But 20 years later, those wines are like singing. And the wines that were from warmer vintages that were maybe quite flashy right out of the chute in 20 years are starting to deteriorate more quickly. Because the other thing about acid is that it acts as an antioxidant. So it slows the aging process. You know, even for a wine that has a screw cap that isn't going to get the same kind of slow oxidation that you would get through a natural cork, it keeps the wine fresher longer. And that's a good thing. So
absolutely, absolutely.
Way overripe, super high alcohol, and then they're kind of doctored up to make them, you know, and some of these wines aren't just supermarket wines. Some of them are $800 a bottle, you know, fancy wines. But if you taste those wines, and how many people are going to spend $800 on a bottle of wine and have multiple vintages? But if you taste every vintage of those wines, they taste exactly the same every year. And they might have 8 different bottlings from 8 different vineyards, and all of them taste the same, because you're not tasting the location in the vineyard, you're tasting what they do once they get it in the winery.
Well, once they effectively get it in the lab. But that's something I learned from you talking the other day, which is some of the high-end, really expensive wines that you would think, of course they don't add any color or flavoring or anything. Some of those famous brands will do it.
Absolutely. And you can, if you taste the same wine from 3 different vintages, knowing what I know about those vintages and the temperature and, you know, the differences in sort of the atmospheric differences from year to year, and you can't tell a difference between one vintage and another, then that's not something that you can do without manipulating the wine pretty significantly. So,
right. Super interesting. I mean, because I have been sort of very on the warpath about the mass market wines that are inexpensive, that they all taste every year. Pick one of those brands. I'm not going to name any of them. They taste the same every single time. And clearly those are being manufactured in a lab in a factory. The idea that there are some of the $500 bottles that are like that is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it necessarily makes them bad wines. It just doesn't interest, you know, because they do that in champagne as well. I mean, all of the big champagne houses have their, you know, standard multi-vintage or non-vintage cuvées, and they're buying juice from some of the bulk houses in Champagne, and they're blending for flavor, you know, and blending for consistency. And, you know, some of those wines I think are decent wines, but, you know, some of them charge, you know, $250 for a wine that's made like that. If I spend $250 on a bottle of champagne, I want, you know, a grower producer, you know, wine from a small vineyard, you know, that's worth $250 for me. Anybody, you know, it's like anybody can push a gas pedal and go fast. It doesn't take a lot of talent, you know, but, you know, making something like that in a lab with a formula is kind of the same way to me. I mean, I'm
right. I will also add that, you know, when a California winery, and there is one famous name that makes a Pinot Noir and injects all this flavor into it and all this extra body and structure, so that it actually tastes like a Cabernet Sauvignon. And and people are like, this Pinot Noir is incredible. And I'm like, well, it was, you know, doctored in a lab to taste like a Napa Valley cab. Like,
if you can't see through your Pinot in a glass, then something's wrong.
Exactly. Say no more. All right. So what wines are we tasting today? I think we're going to start with that Viognier that we were talking about.
We first started producing in 1997, and it was from a friend of mine, John Simpson's vineyard in Madera, California, which Madera is not known particularly as a, you know, high-end wine region, but John is a great farmer, and he was the one that initially like gave me the opportunity to start making Viognier. And the grapes were very inexpensive, so this was the first wine we made for our tasting room when we first opened in 1996. Because I didn't have enough wine to keep the tasting room open, I only made like 5,000 or 6,000 cases when I bought that place. So, and we were selling in 15 states. So this was something I could pour in the tasting room every day. It was like 18 bucks, I think, a bottle the first year, 20 bucks a bottle. And I think even now, however many years later, 25 or whatever years later, it's still like only $24, $25 or something.
Yeah.
But
and this is just steel fermented.
100% steel fermented. We don't do secondary fermentation, so we just do primary. We turn all the sugar into or all the sugar into alcohol. The vineyard now is from a vineyard down in Paso Robles exclusively. John Simpson sold his vineyard about 5 or 6 years ago and retired. He's an older guy and he's still out there and kicking, but the new owners tore out all the grapes and planted almonds, which is a big money crop these days. So
yeah. Well, almond milk.
This is now a really nice vineyard in a cooler part of Paso Robles. So it allows us to, Madero is a little warmer spot. Paso is a little bit cooler, so it gives us it's much easier to keep the freshness in this wine. And now what we do, because it's such a long drive from Paso to Napa, is we pick the grapes first thing in the morning, and then we crush them down there, and we bring it up as juice. And it allows us to, really keep the health of the grape at its optimum when we crush it. If you put them in bins and you drive them 4 hours up to Napa, the fruit's going to get a little beat up. Even if you put it in a refrigerated truck, it just gets a little beat up. Yeah. So we crush it down there. We bring the juice up to Napa, get it in a tank, settle it down, and then ferment it. So,
and this is a very bright, refreshing wine with some nice acidity. What's the perfect meal to have with this Viognier?
I mean, the great thing about Viognier to me is it tastes nothing like Chardonnay. So you get a lot of stone fruit, white peach, apricot, honeysuckle notes. It's got a floral tone. So for me, I love it with any kind of shellfish. Ceviche, one of the first wine dinners I ever did with Viognier in San Francisco, probably in 1998, was like a trio of ceviches with Viognier, and it was just beautiful. But I love it with scallops, almost any way, any kind of shellfish, Asian food, anything with a little heat. I love it with Cajun food as well, like, some spicy crawfish or gumbo or something like that. That to me is the perfect kind of foil for this wine. But this is also a really good wine just to sip on a warm day and, have it as, I drink this a lot when I'm grilling, as a little aperitif with some starters or something. So
yeah, you hit it on the head. You nailed it. I think that it's a great wine to take, to the pool or the beach or the barbecue, but especially with the shellfish. I mean, a really bright, nice, acidic, refreshing wine like this. It's like a beautiful splash of lemon when you combine it with the shellfish, which obviously is a great pairing. All right, so we're going to move from that to the Chardonnay wild yeast.
Right. So this is a great contrast of styles because we make 4 or 5 different Chardonnays. Our regular Napa Chardonnay is partially stainless fermented, partially oak fermented, but not very much new oak. This wine is really our sort of top of the line reserve Chardonnay. So as the label suggests, this is fermented 100% with natural yeast, native yeast. So we don't inoculate or add commercial yeast to this. We allow the yeast that's on the skins and in the air to turn the sugar into alcohol. And what that does is it gives you 8 or 9 different strains of yeast that will turn the sugar into alcohol. Some strains will start early, but only go to a certain point. And those strains of yeast are, not quite as smart as the other ones. So as the alcohol rises, they die. They can't handle the higher alcohols. So one will start, die off, the next one will kick in, die off, the next one will kick in and die off. And all of these different strains of yeast have their own flavors and aromas. When you use commercial yeast, winemakers will frequently do yeast trials so that they can see what flavors and aromas the individual yeast strains add to the wine. But with this wine, you let it go. So you get all these layers of flavor and aroma just simply from the yeast, in addition to the fruit. And this is 100% barrel fermented. It stays in oak about 16 months.
Wow.
And it's about half new oak.
So this never sees a tank. It gets crushed, the juice comes out, and it goes straight into barrels, and it ferments in the barrels.
It sees a tank for a couple of days, so it'll get crushed into a tank, and then we cold stabilize that so that it helps drop out a lot of the solid material. We give it a cold soak for a couple of days, and then we press it off the skins, and it goes right into the barrel, and it starts fermenting in the barrel.
Super interesting.
Interesting. We also make our Pinot Noirs this way, but we do the Pinot in picking bins. So we crush the Pinot grapes, pump the skins and the juice into half-ton picking bins, and ferment in picking bins. First, we cold stabilize those for like almost a week, and then we move them into a slightly warmer room and they start fermenting. We do the punch downs of the skins by hand on the Pinot, and we could talk about this more. We're doing a Pinot next, right?
Yep, we're doing a Pinot next. By the way, Ron has had this Chardonnay at the winery, loves it. Great Chardonnay. I gotta tell you, I'm out of step with it. You know, the in vogue stylish thing is steel fermented Chardonnays and, you know, white wines that are still fermented. I love an oak aged Chardonnay that just has great combination of flavors. So this is one of my favorites. We have a question from Melissa. How different is each vintage in the flavor profile? And I assume she's referring to this Chardonnay.
Well, quite a bit. But there's a very consistent style that you will see amongst, you know, several vintages of this wine or of any of our wines. But, you know, the temperature from year to year can make a pretty big difference. With Chardonnay, sometimes in a warmer year, you'll tend to get more of the kind of baked fruit, like fruit pie sort of aromas, as opposed to something that's a little more tropical. But this wine also is a blend of like 5 different vineyards. So 2 or 3 of these vineyards are down in Carneros, including Hyde Vineyard and a vineyard called Jenny's, which is down closer to the water. Those vineyards tend to have more tropical fruit. And then some of the other vineyards are up in the mountains, up valley. So up near Stagecoach Vineyard and in Oakville, those wines tend to have more citrusy notes, lemon curd, and sometimes that kind of pie dough yeasty characteristic. And we have different clonal varieties too in different vineyards. So all of those things can you know, really they add to the complexity of the wine, but they also make it a little bit different from year to year. So
now this one as a barrel fermented oak aged Chardonnay is going to have a lot more body and structure, and it's less of a barbecue and pool or bring it to the beach wine. This is one you want to pair with food.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big wine, and we tend to refer to this as our red wine lovers white wine because it has a lot of structure, it has a lot of spice, has a lot of layers of flavors, and as it sits in your glass during a meal, it'll change pretty dramatically in your glass. I mean, all wines do that, but this wine, I think, even more so. This is a wine for me that makes me think, and it makes me come back to the glass. And I like a wine that does that. It keeps telling a story, and the story keeps changing as the wine gets some oxygen and develops in the glass. And so every time you come back to this wine and smell it and taste it, and then you pair it with food, the wine will change dramatically, and it just keeps getting more and more interesting. So I love this wine for that reason. I mean, sometimes you just want to drink a bottle of wine that tastes good, that, you know, slides down easy, gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling, and you don't have to think about it. But this wine, for me, always makes me think. And it's another thing I love about Pinot Noirs too, is there's always a complexity there that always keeps you guessing, and it keeps bringing you back to the glass. And those wines to me are my favorite wines.
Yep. So it's your Last Supper. What are you pairing with this?
This wine goes well with a lot of different things. So, I mean, it's a big wine, so you could do it with something like, you know, lobster. But I eat a lot of salmon, and I fish in Alaska, and I bring salmon home with me. I love this with king salmon, you know, cooked rare, you know, like fast sear. And, you know, you could put some different kinds of flavorings on the salmon. I like doing sometimes like fruit salsas, or, you know, something with a little habanero spice to it. But I also like, you know, just simple lemon and dill and that sort of thing. So,
yeah.
But this wine will go with that. It'll go with, you know, a lot of different kinds of pork. Anything lighter on the grill, I think would be with chicken on the grill, or, you know, you could do it with duck too. I mean, I love Pinot and duck. That's like one of my favorite things, but this would go with duck depending on the sauce you used or whatever.
Yeah, it's got the body and the structure to do that. My pairing with this would be a really fresh, fantastic lobster roll, yeah, with like house-made cottage fries, like house-made chips. And you get the combination of this, you know, the aromatics from the oak and the overtones flavor-wise with the lobster. Oh my God. That'll set you free.
I've had this wine a number of times with like fresh king crab claws in Alaska, and it's just out of this world. It's wonderful.
Well, hopefully we'll have time to talk about your Alaska wine dinner adventures before we wrap. All right, so we're going to move on to the Pinot Noir, the Gary's Vineyard Pinot Noir. Evidently, Gary has a vineyard, and you guys use the grapes to make this wine.
If you look closely at the label, you'll see it's a plural possessive Gary's. So two guys named Gary own this particular.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah.
Gary Pizzoni and Gary Francione. And so these guys were childhood friends. They grew up together. Both their families were very close. They grow citrus and vegetables in the Salinas Valley. They've been doing it for generations. And they're crazy guys, but they're really good farmers, and they're really passionate about Pinot Noir especially. They do Chard down there, they do Syrah down there, but for me, the Santa Lucia Highlands is one of the premier Pinot growing regions in California. And it's predominantly because of these guys. And the mythology behind this is that Gary Pizzoni went to Burgundy and smuggled budwood from La Tâche back to Monterey and planted his vineyards with this La Tâche budwood. So this Gary's Vineyard Pinot is 100% this La Tâche clone. We now call it the Pizzoni clone because I think he got in trouble with Department of Agriculture for talking about smuggling budwood into the United States. But we originally started making Pizzoni Vineyard in 97 and 98. But Gary and I had issues because he kept moving me around in his vineyard, and I wanted like a consistent block that I could make year in and year out so that I had a consistent flavor profile, a consistent kind of, you know, working knowledge of what I was working with year in and year out. And Pizzoni kept moving me around. So in 99, I shifted over to Gary's Vineyard, which was managed by Gary Francione. And this vineyard is further north in the Santa Lucia Highlands, whereas the Pizzoni Vineyard is pretty far south, pretty high up in the hill. It's a little warmer spot. This vineyard is a cooler spot, and Gary Francione also has a home ranch, which is 1 mile away from this vineyard, called Rosella's Vineyard. So we make 2 separate bottlings from Rosella's vineyard, a 777 clone, and then this Latache clone. And then we make the Gary's vineyard, and then we also make one from Franchione's vineyard down by Pizzoni called Sierra Mar Vineyard. And that's a blend of a few different clones from that vineyard. So all of these Pinots, though, are very elegant in style. So if you look at the color of the wine, it's not dark. It's quite light, really. And people are frequently shocked by that. But I like Pinots to be more elegant in style, to be more feminine, if you will. But these wines are powerful when it comes to the spice and the flavor profile, even though the color is very light. But that is what I love about Pinot. I mean, I already make Cab and I make Syrah and I make these big, heavy, intense red wines. I want this to be a beautiful, like spicy, like some of them have some tea spice in them, some flowers, cedar, characteristics. The Gary's tends to have a little more earthiness to it, but it's more of a plum fruit style. It's a little darker fruit. The Rosella's is more red fruit. It's brighter. It's more it has that kind of velvety texture. This has, a good amount of tannin for Pinot. It's got a little bit of good acid bite to it. And these wines age ridiculously well. I mean, I still drink the 97s, 98, 99s from down there. And I could blind taste winemakers and sommeliers on that, and they would swear that it's French Burgundy.
Yeah, interesting. I think, I love these wines. I'm assuming that, some of that, the spiciness and some of that extra oomph comes from the fact that you're in this warm climate, in California, and you're getting more, the fruit is more ripened and you're getting more evolution.
Well, I would say that compared to most California Pinots, these wines are less that way. And that this is a pretty cool climate because you get a fair amount of fog from Big Sur. I mean, Big Sur is on the coast. You go over the mountain range and you're in these vineyards. So it gets a lot of fog from in the morning from the coast.
Yeah.
It's a big wind in the afternoon, which keeps it dry, which is important because if Pinot gets really wet, then you get a lot of mold and mildew because the clusters are really tight. They're very thin skinned and there's not a lot of airspace. A cluster of Cabernet is big and long and it's more spread out and the skins are very thick. So you don't have as much of a mold and mildew problem in Cabernet that you do in Chardonnay and Pinot.
Right, right.
This is a relatively cool area. But, it's like 14 alcohol for sure, but it's not that heavy, dark, rich, intense style that you get from a lot of areas.
Yeah. So now this kind of a Pinot that has that Burgundy character and quality to it, I almost see as like a mid-meal, almost a second course wine before you go into the big finish of whether it's steak or something, a big entree. What is a pairing that you like with this Pinot Noir?
I mean, I think Pinots are probably the most versatile wine that you can get. So, I mean, I'll drink them with almost anything. I'll drink them with steak and, almost any time. I made surf and turf last night. I did like little New York strips with some salmon and we had Pinot. So actually I had someone else's Pinot, but it was beautiful. But for me, I can't eat certain things without thinking about Pinot. So like, I love duck and I do some bird hunting. So I love pheasant. So with fowl, I love Pinot. I also think Pinot can be a very good Thanksgiving wine. But
great with turkey.
Also anything with like bacon, mushrooms, black truffles. I adore Pinot with those kinds of flavors, with the earthier flavors, or with the fattiness of bacon. Foie gras, even if you I've had, you go to like Emerald's place in New Orleans and you get these little quail stuffed with foie gras. That and Pinot to me is like, that's magic.
Yeah. You
You can
just
also,
inspired me. Tonight we're having for dinner roast chicken with a mushroom, like a really nice mushroom sauce, roasted Brussels sprouts with bacon, like, freshly cooked bacon, and mashed potatoes. It's a perfect Pinot Noir meal.
I mean, you could do the wild yeast Chardonnay with that too. I think would be great, but sometimes it's fun to open a white and a red and like go back and forth and try them. I mean, whenever I do wine dinners, like, they line up the glasses and they pour them and then they'll come and clean up the empty glasses. But I leave all of the wines in there and don't drink them and make them, leave them on the table so I can go back and try them throughout the meal. And then I can try everything with everything because it's just kind of fun.
Absolutely.
A flavor pairing that you never thought would work. And it just strikes you and you go, holy cow. I mean, and it might bring out a nuance of the wine that you didn't expect, or the wine might bring out a nuance of the dish that you didn't expect. And that's the fun of it. You got to play around.
Totally fun. And by the way, Melissa, I agree. I love that too. That's the thing in the pandemic, Dave, and everybody watching, that I miss the most. We've for many years done big grand tasting events in and around the New York area, 30, 40 plus, 50 plus wine tasting tables and all kinds of artisanal food. And that's what I miss, is that, you can taste so many different wines, and it's an extravaganza of tasting sensation that is exactly what you just described, where, hey, keep all those tasting glasses on the table and try the rosé with the steak. You might be surprised. It could be a nice combination. And I think that's the thing I miss the most about, our big grand tasting events, for obvious reasons, have been on pause for the last year. And I'm looking forward to those coming back, because you to have that experience of going through so many different flavor profiles of wines is great. So it would not be a virtual trip to Oakville in the heart of Napa Valley without, wait for it, a Cabernet Sauvignon.
There you go.
So we're going to talk about the Stagecoach Vineyard 2016 Minor Family Wines Cabernet Sauvignon. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. But Dave, tell us about this last wine in the group here.
So Stagecoach Vineyard is a vineyard that was planted in the mid-90s by a gentleman named Jan Krupp, and it's right above where our Oakville vineyards are, up towards Atlas Peak, but from Atlas Peak north, almost to Pritchard Hill, like where Chapelet is, which is really right up behind the winery. So it's a couple 1,000-foot elevation generally on average. And so it's red, rocky, volcanic soil, which is very typical for the Oakville area. It's that red, silty, alluvial soil that was all volcanic. So it doesn't hold a lot of moisture, and consequently, it doesn't push a lot of fruit. So your yields are pretty low naturally, and lots of iron in the soil. So it's really the ideal soil for Bordeaux varietals. And we've been really successful too, growing Chardonnay up there. We did Marsanne and Rison, white grapes from the Rhone Valley up there as well, for our Rhone or white Rhone blend. But it really is ideal for the Bordeaux varietals. And so we've been buying grapes from Stagecoach since, I think, 1997, 98. And the original plan was to produce the Oracle from up there, that Bordeaux blend. But because we had a bunch of different blocks and we had a lot of grapes and certain things weren't ready for the blend yet, we started producing both Merlot and Cabernet vineyard designate wines from there. So the Stagecoach Vineyard tends to have a pretty big red fruit style as compared to our Oakville Cab, which usually has a much blacker fruit. Mm-hmm. Stagecoach has a real brightness to it, which I love. And we almost always blend some Cabernet Franc into this. and occasionally a splash of Merlot or maybe a little touch of Petit Verdot, but it's usually predominantly Cab and Cab Franc.
What are the percentages roughly in this wine of the grapes?
This vintage is probably maybe 6 or 7 or 8% Franc. And I don't know that this one has any Merlot in it. I'd have to look up I'm getting old and I can't remember this stuff as well as I used to, but it's roughly 90% probably Cab, and the rest is Franc and Merlot probably.
Well, 90+% Cabernet. And so this has got more of that red fruit in the flavor profile.
It's got that kind of black cherry almost, but that red quality.
Yeah.
Great structure, great tannins, lots of power and good acidity, but we don't make the kind of Cab that is kind of the common Cab in Napa these days, which is that really thick, high alcohol extracted style. This is
gigantic Napa Valley Cab.
Yeah, I mean this has finesse, and
yeah,
it has balance, and it has elegance to it, and that's always what we strive for in the wines that we make. I don't have any interest in making. We don't get 100 points on our wines. The only wines that get 100 points are the ones that are those big extracted crazy things. And I don't really care. I'm not trying to make a 100-point wine. I want wines that people want to drink, that taste good with food, that age well, that will continue to get better and better with time, and that are drinkable, that, people aren't afraid to pull the cork. A lot of those wines that are 100-point wines that are $1,000 a bottle now, most of the people that buy that stuff end up never drinking them. I mean,
that's a big problem. Even for I don't have any of the bottles of that value, but I've got some really nice, California and Italian and French wines that are, relatively expensive, 100 plus, 150, $200 a bottle. The problem is you don't drink them. You let them sit there.
That's the great thing about the pandemic for me is I have a big wine cellar, obviously, and I buy a lot of French wine, Italian wine, Spanish wine, but my rule now is, on any given night, pull anything you want out of the cellar. Like even if it's a $400 bottle of, Bordeaux, or, we drank a bottle of Romani Conti Richebourg from 03 the other night. Had to be, I don't know, $1,500 bottle of wine. But I'm like, we could all be dead tomorrow, so drink.
Exactly. So this Cabernet Sauvignon, Stagecoach Vineyard, to me seems very much like a Bordeaux. It really brings out the spirit of Bordeaux. But the best Bordeauxs, in my view, are the ones that have tremendous character and punch, but they have a smoothness and just that finesse. And It sounds like this one is really in that vein.
And that's what we do. I mean, those are the kinds of wines that we make, and I think they're very California in style. But to me, this is what classic Napa Cabs were 20 years ago, and that's what I fell in love with. I'm not a big fan of the newer style, so I mean, those are not wines I'm going to buy or drink very often. I mean, I'll drink them if somebody brings them to dinner and opens it, but it's not a wine I want more than a half a glass of, because they're just too overwhelming. And, even a bone-in ribeye isn't going to tame that beast. And, in 30 years, it might be ready to drink, but I might not be here 30 years from now. So
exactly. So quick question from Susan. It's been many years since we've been in Napa. Is the Silverado Trail still a good alternate route versus the congestion of Highway 29?
Well, I'm going to say no. I mean, they're both pretty crowded now. And actually, interestingly, there are no stop signs on the Silverado Trail or lights anywhere between Deer Park Road, which is north of St. Helena, which is the road I take to go home, and Trancas down in Napa. So it's got to be, 18, 20 miles. There's no stop sign. But every afternoon now at like 3:30, 4 o'clock, heading south, Well, now because all these contractors are up there doing work, cutting down burned trees and building new homes, and so it's like the march of contractors getting back out of town from 3 o'clock on. So the traffic like gets bumper to bumper right in front of Minor, like from maybe ZD Winery just to like the Oakville crossroad, and then it just opens back up again. And I don't know what it is. It gets stuck right in there. So the trail is pretty busy still, but there's still no stoplights on it. So 29 is more problematic going south and north because you're going through towns and there's a lot of stoplights. So, you know, I mean, the traffic hasn't been bad because of the pandemic. It's just not crowded up there. But now the weekends are starting to fill up again. So the traffic's coming back.
It's starting to open up. Andres has a question. The 2017 and the 2020 fires, how have they affected you?
Well, I mean, almost every year for the last 5 years, we've had fires that were, you know, frightening and dangerous and bad. 17 was particularly bad because there were 3 separate fires all kind of converging. And, you know, we didn't lose any structures and we didn't really get any vineyards burned, but I did have some grapes left in 17 out on the vine, maybe 10% of our total production for the year that got smoke taint. And that was mostly at the Stagecoach, and mostly those grapes went into the Oracle, our flagship wine, unfortunately. So the Oracle is smaller production in the 17, and it's a different mix. It's got more Merlot and Franc than Cab because the Cab was the stuff that was mostly left out there. But it's still a beautiful wine. 20 was a different story because it came within 500 feet of burning my house down, and it burned a lot of vineyard. And I mean, it didn't destroy the vineyard. I mean, they're blooming again now. We pruned it, everything got pruned back, and it's coming back. But the smoke was so thick that the vast majority of the red wines that we made, we did not make in 2020. So 2020, I have all my white wines, and I have some of the Rhone style varietals, but almost all of the Bordeaux varietal reds in Napa were destroyed. And also all of my Pinot, because they had a big fire down in Monterey as well, that burned over from Carmel Valley up to the top of Santa Lucia Highlands. So I got 0 Pinot in 2020 as well. So pretty devastating year for us. The only silver lining in it is that once COVID hit and all of the distributors stopped buying wine for me, I had no money coming in really. So I didn't have to pay for all those grapes. I didn't have to buy glass and stuff for bottling. And so it's going to be a relatively financially easy year to suffer through for me because I didn't have to spend, $5 million on grapes.
Yeah, you don't have to make all that wine.
I do have a lot of 18 and 19, so those wines are just the reds are just starting to come out for the 18s. So I've got plenty of wine for the next couple of years, and we'll have 1 year that'll just be kind of short. But it's been a rough year on a lot of fronts. And if you look at the picture of the winery is no longer yellow. It's now, we remodeled the whole exterior and put a new roof on during COVID because we've been shut down. So we remodeled the inside of the tasting rooms last year. And once we got shut down for COVID, we started on the exterior. So the winery no longer really looks that way. The decks where you see stucco walls now are now like stainless steel strip railings, so you can see the whole deck, and from the deck you get a much bigger view of the whole valley. And it's kind of a dark gray building with a black roof and black trim, put all new windows and doors in. And yeah,
so this is the thing of the past is what we're looking at here.
That's minor version 1.
Yeah, interesting. Well, listen, we're going to wrap in a second. I want to say that you and also Ron Bartles, who's watching, have piqued my interest in. I've never tried the Oracle, but it's one of Ron's top 10 wines in all of California. Kudos, he says on that one, and it sounds amazing. So we have to make a date, Dave, to open a bottle of that, and I'm dying to try it. I have one last question for you, which some people might be curious about, and that is, at the White House, what minor family wines did they serve?
I think the vast majority of the dinners, they served the wild yeast Chardonnay, but they also served Gary's Vineyard Pinot at a couple of them.
Is that right?
And they were all different dinners for different, some of them were honoring, like General Pace when he retired. One of the dinners was for him. And I got a really nice note from him because one of my wine club members was good friends with him. And his letter was really wonderful because he basically said, anytime you have a dinner at the White House, it's a very special occasion, and your wines and the food and the pairings really made it a really special evening for me. So to hear his sort of reverence for, being able to have a meal at the White House was very moving to me. And for him to send me a letter, it was great. But yeah, I think almost all of them were wild yeast, Chard, or Pinot.
Interesting. Not a Cabernet. I would have assumed Cabernet.
No, and that was interesting to me too. So I know they have some of the Cabernet in the cellar there, but at some point in time, I think maybe midway through President Obama's term, the guy who is the wine steward left the White House, and he'd been there through I think Clinton and Bush too. And he had worked in Napa for many years, and that's how we kind of got the hookup. Is he remembered our wines from Napa, and I ran into him at a tasting in DC, and he was like, "Oh my God, I haven't tried your wines in forever." And he tasted them. And he goes, "We have to get these wines." So, and every time they did a dinner, he'd send me the menu, and he'd do a little explanation of what the dinner was all about and why he chose these wines with the food, and they're really quite nice.
No, that is awesome. All right, listen, I'm going to, just for everybody's convenience, if you are curious and want to order any of the wines, this is the website. That's the promo code. Dave, we got to make a date up in Alaska to drink some of your wine and have some king salmon.
That sounds like a plan to me. I can't wait to go back.
I'm planning on it. I've been looking at the Bubble, the Mermaid Lounge there.
Yeah, the Bubbly Mermaid in Anchorage.
Exactly. All right.
And shellfish. It's amazing.
Well, listen, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Dave, for hosting us and telling us all about the winery and the wines. We will hope to do this again sometime soon. Maybe we'll do a food and wine pairing. Next week, if you're watching and you're curious, we're going to be with Robibero Winery, the star of the Hudson Valley. Extraordinary place. And we're looking forward to that one. So if you're around on Wednesday evening next week, tune in. And otherwise, be safe and be well. We'll see you soon.